In today's video, I want to show you a couple photos from an expired roll of Kodak Gold I recently got developed. The first photo on this roll was shot back in September when I went on a little morning excursion. I was going with my friend Andrew, who is a photographer and professor at my uni, and in the last couple months I was able to work with him within my internship that I had to do for my bachelor's. So for my internship, I had asked Andrew if I could work as his photography assistant, and I ended up working with him and with a photography gallery in my town, which Andrew is part of. The expired roll I was shooting was a roll that Andrew gave to me because he didn't have any use for it anymore. And so I was intending to shoot some pretty casual photography with that roll in the following weeks. I had started shooting with my Pentax K1000, but after the excursion I wanted to shoot a different roll with the Pentax, therefore I moved the expired roll of film into my Olympus XA3. However, the XA3's battery died just then, and so that expired roll of film was stuck in a camera that I wasn't able to operate as long as I didn't replace the battery. This fairly simple problem took quite some time to be solved, partly because I had some difficulties finding the right battery in the stores in my town, and mainly because I was too lazy to look for a battery carefully and dragged this search for a couple months. But then, sometime in December, I finally got myself the right batteries and revived the camera, and so I was able to continue shooting. I finished the roll right around Christmas and got it developed before the new year. The result of my procrastination is something I actually enjoy quite a lot. I mean, the amount of time it took to actually finish the roll. So the photos on this roll begin in the warm days of September and end in the cold days of December, documenting a variety of days and situations across that time span. I think it's fun to review one roll that documents a longer period of time, unlike most of my rolls that have photos from just one or two shoots. And so that is what this video is about. Alright, so let's start off with this photo here. This is from said excursion that I was on with Andrew, and this is the place that we went to. So Andrew knew about this old quarry, or at least what is left of that quarry, on a nearby mountain here in town, and he asked me if I'd want to join him because he's currently exploring that place and documenting it photographically. And so I did, and I was up here with him. It was quite a cool place. We were in the midst of a forest, and then suddenly on the side of the trail we'd sometimes find an old broken shed. We found some broken walls made of some bricks that really looked old, and like all the plants were already invading that rock again. And then eventually we came to this slightly bigger place that had actual big walls. As you can see here, the walls with the graffiti on it. So Andrew was just walking around here and exploring different corners of this place. He had his camera and a flash with him. The flash is the thing that he's got on his monopod, as you can see. And so he was standing here. I don't remember exactly what he was photographing, maybe the trees in the corner there. I just like the scene with the huge walls, him being pretty small in the scene standing on these rocks, and all the plants that are kind of getting this place back to them. And so therefore I wanted to get this photo with the film that he had given me an hour before. I think the photo came out beautifully, even though the film is expired, and Andrew was warning me that he did not carefully store the film, that the film might be quite trashy. I wasn't really taking the film very seriously because I thought, well, it's probably not going to be good. And therefore I'm actually surprised how good this photo looks, because the colors are looking fine. And also the exposure is fine. In case you're wondering, I overexposed these photos by 3 or 4 stops usually, because I knew that this roll of film is about a decade past its expiration date, and I think, as far as I've learnt, each decade you should at least overexpose by 1 stop. And I usually overexpose Kodak Gold anyway, and so in this photo I metered the light for the shadows and then overexposed by probably 3 stops, maybe even 4, I'm not entirely sure anymore, but by quite a bit, and it turns out the result is great. I'm quite surprised how good this looks. I really like how the greens came out here in this photo, and the overall exposure actually looks really good. We've got quite a lot of dynamic range, and everything's quite clear actually, which I'm really glad about because, well, it just gives me another better photo than what I expected. And overall, the scene itself, as said, is quite interesting, I find, because if you don't know the context about the quarry, you don't really understand what kind of place this is. At least I guess you wouldn't know if I wouldn't have told you. And the composition itself is sort of interesting because we've got all of these leading lines leading up into the right corner, which just gives this photo a sort of depth that you can feel. And then we've got Andrew placed in here. He nicely gives us a sense of scale so that we actually know the size of this place. Then here are the next two photos I want to show you. As you can see, these are still from the same excursion to that quarry. The left photo is basically 180 degrees turned around from the previous photo, so this is just the view that was right behind me, and I set up the camera again. By the way, I shot all of these photos on a tripod because, as said, I was overexposing brutally, and also I had the aperture set to about f8, maybe sometimes f11. Therefore, the shutter speeds were usually far too slow for me to actually handhold the photos. So I think these are probably about half a second, maybe even 1 second, I'm not sure. So the left photo is quite a simple landscape, I would say. It just shows you this place that we're at. You can't really see the quarry so much in this photo. It's basically just rocks in the foreground and some forest in the background. And I'm quite happy about how nicely we can still see the sky in this photo. I think it's alright. It's a bit aimless, you don't really know where to look. So it's a little random, but I was just having fun shooting this expired film, and I'm again quite pleasantly surprised by how good it actually turned out. And then on the right side we have a little photo experiment, you might even want to call it. So I told Andrew I'd like to get a photo of him here because he was photographing something over there, and I told him, it's actually quite a cool frame with the bushes coming from the left and him being framed in between those left bushes and the bushes that you can see on the right side, which are coming towards him. And he then had a fun suggestion. He said that if the shutter speed is long enough, he could actually fire a shot and therefore also the flash during my exposure. And so I had my exposure here probably now set to 1 second so that he has more than enough time to release his shutter and have the flash go off during that 1 second exposure, just to see what kind of effect that might make. In the end, as you can see, not really much happened. It doesn't look like that flash really did much. At first, you probably wouldn't even notice that the flash is actually on, but you can see at the end of his monopod there's this bright white light, but it's still quite small, so I personally don't think you'd notice instantly. But now you know, in case you hadn't noticed, this photo is flashed, and I do think that a lot of light probably reflected from the ground onto him, so he is quite nicely lit, and I guess that is partly thanks to the flash. But overall, the photo, again, the exposure came out beautifully, even though I was not entirely sure if this brutal overexposing that I was doing was not a bit too much. And you can see on Lenny's head, Lenny is Andrew's dog, you can see when you look at his head that this shutter speed was a bit long, and of course we didn't manage to get him to stand still. Overall, this photo is one of my favorite photos from the roll. Maybe the first shot is better, or this one, I'm still not quite sure, but I really like the experimental feature of this photo. But also overall, the composition worked out really nicely, I think, because as said, we've got Andrew as the subject with his dog framed in between these bushes, and we've got this nice forest in the background, but we also have this sense of mystery. It's not really a mysterious photo, but it does give you some questions when you look at the environment with the walls. Again, we've got this contrast between the forest and the walls, and here even with some graffiti on the right side, posing the questions, what is this place? And again, I don't think a quarry would be the first thing you'd think of. I mean, correct me if you would have immediately guessed that this is a quarry, but I don't think that I would have guessed. I just would have had a lot of questions about this photo, and that's something I personally like a lot in photos, is when it poses questions that are not directly answered by the photographer. I mean, in this case, I'm answering it for you. I know, I'm sorry to not leave space for interpretation for you, but that's usually the effect that one gets, that one can just interpret the photo as they like. Then here are another two photos from that morning. The left photo is a little random actually, but I really like it. So this is actually after we had come down already. This is almost back at his car. So down here we met these two ladies and got into a short chat, and I just stepped back after a while to get a photo of the scene. And I think it's really cool how Andrew was still standing in the sunlight and the two ladies are in the shadow, even though the film was expired and I wouldn't be sure how its dynamic range would work. Nevertheless, this photo came out beautifully, I think. I really like how the colors turned out here. We've got this nice contrast between warm orange and slightly red tones in the highlights, and this overall blue-greenish tone in the shadows. Overall, this shot I think came out quite nicely because also we've got these 3 different subjects we can look at, and they all are fitted in a way, I find personally at least, that the photo feels quite balanced. And they also are actually quite nicely framed in the background, thanks to the garage that we've got there. So yeah, a couple of things that came out quite nicely. And then the right photo is just another photo that I got as we were still at the top, just of the environment. Here we don't really see anything of the quarry, it was just the rocks with the beautiful trees. I just love mountains, and so I wanted to get this photo. It's just a bit of a pity that you can't see the sky here at all. Maybe, I don't know what happened there. Just overexposed? I don't know. It's gone. There's no blue here. Then here is the last photo that I've got from that trip to the quarry. What I like here is the strong sense of depth that we can see. We can see there's these leaves in the foreground, and obviously I didn't shoot this at a very high aperture. This time I opened up the aperture so that the leaves in the foreground would blur a little bit so that you can see that these are closer to the camera, whereas the rest of the composition then flows into the background back to the quarry. I quite like how all of this greenery, all the bushes and trees are framing this patch of rocks. It's all just nicely framed, almost in an oval shape, but with the rocks in the middle leading to it like a little path. It all just flows quite nicely. Something I'm lesser happy with, however, is the overall exposure. So the rocks in the foreground are overexposed. They just went white, sadly. But I think that is due to, well, of course, my overexposure, which I pushed even further here because I was worried that the rocks at the back wouldn't get enough light. And something else that we've got here is a sun flare, which usually I like. I think sun flares are cool effects, but here it sort of just fades the bottom in a way that it just adds to the overexposure. So I'm not entirely sure if I really like it. Yeah, this is just one more photo I wanted to show you from this trip. This is the last one. And now let's move on to another day. These 2 photos are of the same house. Melly and I were just on a walk during sunset and came across this house, and I thought it was really cute, especially the left photo I like a lot because the style of the house is this old Austrian style, which I always think is really cute. But something I really like here is the liveliness, you could say. There aren't any people in this photo, but there are things that signalize the presence of people here, especially the cloths that are hanging there to dry. I also think the table with the chair, they look like somebody does sit there occasionally. They don't look like they're rotting away or anything. They look used, and so therefore this scene just gets some life. I think it gives this photo a warm touch, a homey atmosphere, one might want to call it, and the right photo has less of that. The right photo is just showing this front area of the house, and I personally now think that it's sort of a boring photo, but I still wanted to include it so that I don't only include photos that I like, but also this one, which I think turned out fairly boring. There's not really much that is special about it. I just wanted to photograph some of the details here, such as the satellite dishes and just the style of the door, etc. But overall, as a photograph, I think the photo turned out a bit boring. Then here is a portrait of Melly. As said, I was just on a walk with Melly here, and as you can see in the background, this is at the exact same spot. I probably didn't even move. I just turned on the flash and then turned to Melly to get a photo of her. I quite often like to surprise people with like a flash photo with the Olympus. And so here I wanted to illuminate the foreground of the scene, in this case Melly with the flash, whereas the other 2 photos were not with the flash. And it worked out more or less. The focus is not on her as usual, but I think that sort of adds to the amateurish aesthetic of this roll of film. Even though I have to, of course, admit this was not intentional. I just hoped that the focus was on her, but it wasn't. But at least something is sharp. It's not all blurry. The background is sharp. You can even see in the background that the sun was actually setting, just that in this case here we were in the shadow, therefore everything is quite flat and blue. But I quite like the portrait. I think it's quite cute and just, yeah, nothing special I would say, but still it worked, and that's a success I guess with expired film. It doesn't look completely dirty, therefore I wanted to include it in this collection as well. Then here are 2 more photos from that walk. On the left side, we were back in the sun, as you can see, and as we were just walking through a park, I think, and then we came to just this space, this open space, there was this telephone box. And as you can see, this telephone box has retired in its function and has received a new function. It's now become sort of a open library for anybody who has books that they want to get rid of to just put their books in here, and for anybody who wants to have that book or just read it in here, they can check it out. And I thought this was really cute, especially with the lighting that we had in here, with the sun shining in here. I thought it had quite a romantic look. And so to document this, I got this photo, and I just really like how the sun comes in. Sadly, I think the camera metered for the highlights here, or just for the midground maybe, but not for the shadows. Therefore, this photo is slightly underexposed, and as you can see, the shadows are getting a little dirty, and the top part of the photo is fading to complete black. I would have loved to see this photo a bit brighter, but well, that's what happens when you shoot with point and shoot cameras. I don't really know where the Olympus meters the light, but I can't really control it, and therefore this is the outcome I have to live with. I think it's not terrible at all, I just would love to see it a bit brighter. And then the photo on the right side is another one of those sort of surprise photos that I like to do, photos that I do not really compose in any way. I just point the camera and press the shutter in the hopes of getting some sort of a photo. In this particular case, Melly and I had come to this playground and she was on the swing, and I just thought it'd be fun to get a photo of her right when she's in front of me, and therefore you can see here she's all in motion. I quite like that. We've got a little bit of motion blur here. I think I would like the photo far less if she would be frozen in time, because I quite like this motion blur effect that you get from movement. And apart from that, I really liked the light here. I mean, of course it's golden hour light, so it's good in that sense anyway, but apart from that, it's coming from behind, which gives this cool look of the light being scattered across the background here with few shadows of the trees. I think it has this cool scattering effect that just gives the whole lighting situation here a sort of interesting look that I think works out quite nicely here. The photo from a composition standpoint is really random and totally not sophisticated, but I actually think it still works. It's still a cool photo, in my opinion at least. Then let's move on with these two photos. I think these two are quite the typical expired film photos. You can see in the left photo that the dynamic range is quite lost in the shadows, and that the shadows have gone a bit fadey, and just the whole photo looks a little washed out and not exactly clean, which in some cases I like and I think has an interesting and cool look. In this case, I find it a little bit more disturbing because the light is already really harsh. And here, due to the shadows being crushed, I think that just intensifies the contrast in a negative way. And therefore, I think this one didn't really work out very nicely. I quite like the view, the overview. The sky is a bit boring. It's a bit too much negative space for my personal taste. I think it'd be nice to have some clouds there, or at least something in that blue sky. Apart from that, I think the composition would have been nice. I mean, it's very simple. It's really not anything really special. And on the right side, I don't exactly know what it is here, but it just looks a little off, I think. The tree actually, or well, let me begin with the composition. It's fairly boring. I think this was just me testing actually if the new batteries that I put into the camera actually work, or if the camera is broken, because I wasn't entirely sure if the camera is broken or if I just need to swap the batteries. Luckily, it was just the batteries that had died. And yeah, so I then got this photo. Usually these photos at the sky, I don't know what it is, but the Olympus as a point and shoot doesn't seem to meter the light very carefully when I pointed at the sky, and so the sides have become a bit darker in this photo. To be honest, the tree I find is quite a boring subject actually. I think I also shot this photo because of the clouds at the back, but because they're directly behind the tree, it feels like the tree is just covering the clouds, and it just all feels very unintentional and aimless. So I think this photo didn't work out at all. Then here's another photo that I think looks quite expired. It looks like expired film. Again, pointing at the sky, seems to have not worked out again. As you can see, all the edges are just becoming a bit darker compared to the middle of the photo, which I usually just notice when I shoot at the sky. I think usually the camera actually doesn't do that, I'm not sure. But basically what I was trying to do here was just capture the lighting situation that we had on this day, and I wanted to get a composition with this lamp hanging and the tree branches, but it's completely aimless and didn't really work. It's one of the worst shots of this roll. I think it's really random, but I still wanted to show it to you because I think it's it came out interesting anyway, and it's always good to like show everything. And so I wanted to show you this one as well, even though there's not much I can say about it because it's just random, I guess. And then here are the last two photos I want to show to you in this video. So on the left side, it's a perfectly blurry photo because I forgot to focus correctly of our cat. Well, it's not our cat, it's Melly's mom's cat, but she likes to come down here and just hang out with us. And she was on the table and we had just come back from grocery shopping. As you can see, I started to put all of the things that we bought just around her because I think stuff like that is really funny. What I mean is sort of annoying the cat in a way that I just put things around her and she just has no idea what on earth I'm doing. She's probably thinking, what is this guy doing? He's so stupid. Maybe I am, I don't know. I just have fun putting all of these things around her. With a flash, she squints her eyes a little and therefore she looks really sick in this photo. In a very bad way. But don't worry, she's healthy, everything's fine with her. And yeah, as you can see, I forgot to set the focus back to like medium range, and therefore my subject is all blurry as half of the photos are, just like the next one as you can see. This photo of the slippers also quite blurry, not completely. I think maybe a little bit of the floor might even be sharp. I'm not sure, but it's part of the whole thing, okay? This is part of the role. Half of the photos that I take with the Olympus are always blurry. It's just part of the thing, it has become. And in this case, what I wanted to shoot here was this beautiful soft light that was coming through that window that, as you can see, has this diffusion on it, and therefore the light that comes through it is always really soft. As I saw this scene, I thought it was quite cute how Melly had put her slippers onto the heating, and I just liked how the light, the soft light as said, was coming from the side and giving the whole scene this beautiful from light to dark gradient. And so I tried to get the photo, as you can see, the right side completely fading into darkness, and the subject here are supposed to be the slippers. I don't know how apparent that is, but I was actually taking the photo for the slippers. So yeah, this one too, very random, but I don't really think it feels so aimless. I do think that it's quite noticeable that I did put some compositional thoughts into this photo, meaning that the slippers here are supposed to be the subject. And I just thought it's a photo that I'll probably like to look back at in a few years' time. You know, when you move to a different place and then you see photos from the place you lived at before, you might begin to reminisce about that place. And so I thought this photo would be that kind of a photo that I would look back at in a couple years. So yeah, that's the last photo. That's all the photos that I wanted to show you from this expired roll of film. These were the highlights, I suppose. As you saw, some were pretty good, actually surprisingly good, and some came out quite expired looking, and a lot of them came out completely blurry. But all in all, I think it was a really fun roll again, and I had a lot of fun going through them and over them again in this video narration to show you. So I hope you also enjoyed this video and the photos that I was able to show you. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious about your thoughts. If there's anything that actually stood out to you in a positive or negative way, whichever, just comment your thoughts. I'm always curious to read all of that. And with that said, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, leave a like and consider subscribing if you haven't yet. And I'll see you again next week in the next video. Until then, goodbye.